Okay, so we left off in class before the third video here, so I'm going to insert that first, and then we will go from there.
My fear is that I'm gonna like the way that I look when professionally photographed. Then it's just a reminder that I don't look that way.
What are you most insecure about physically?
What am I most insecure about physically?
Growing up, I thought I was too pudgy. I didn't want to take my shirt off at the pool. Then now that I'm an adult, I think I'm like too thin and scrawny. Intellectually, I know that I'm not any less of a man because I'm not big and strong, but it's hard sometimes to not look at the people around you and feel less than.
What I think makes a man attractive is athleticism. I have a scar that goes up my knee right here. When I cut my knee open, I was in the hospital for like 2.5 weeks, and I was recovering for months. I resent the fact that it's made me weaker.
I am proportioned like a skinny person, but I have no muscles. Instead, I just have fat there. I don't have big arms. And I'd rather stay under these sleeves that go all the way to my elbow. So I'm always in sleeves that go all the way to my elbow, because then that covers up every part of my body where there's supposed to be muscle definition.
Yeah, if I have to open up here, I don't really like the way that I look most of the time. I grew up in an environment where I was beat up a lot and I was made fun of, and I was kind of told every day that I was ugly. And then in the home life, you know, being Korean, I was also told that I could always be improving how I look. I don't talk about my feelings openly. One wouldn't expect me to have a lot of issues about my body when I'm just riddled with body insecurity.
Normally, when we do shoots, we always get really beautiful models. So when we do,
Okay.
no, but I'm saying it's like,
I'm recreating a John Krasinski Men's Health magazine photo where he looks fucking fine as hell. I'm a comedian, right? I'm a funny guy, and I've always thought growing up, like, funny guys get to look however they want. And that's not it anymore. Like, Chris Pratt was like my body type, and now he's an action star.
try and make the shoulders a little tough. They'll look tough.
How do you look tough with your shoulders? John Krasinski, same body type. Now he's an action star. You are supposed to have this masculineness to you, even if you're a clown.
You have really like feminine lips. I like that.
I know I have very feminine lips.
I never felt that attractive until I met my wife. So today I'm recreating a Cristiano Ronaldo ad, and he looks freaking delicious.
You got some big shoes to fill. He's really good looking.
Yes, I know. Muscles everywhere. Yes, I would absolutely want to look like Cristiano Ronaldo. He's a Greek god. Okay, here's my belly.
Oh, okay.
Now I just gotta stay like this for an hour. Being in good physical shape is so attractive to me because it's the opposite of this horrible period of time in my life when I was injured.
We need people to believe that I'm sexy.
We have to make you a believer.
I'm recreating a Justin Bieber photo today. He's hot. Bieber's hot. I assume we were born with somewhat similar assets. He was a smallish guy, very skinny. You know, to his credit, he worked out a lot. But this photo got a lot of heat because it was photoshopped pretty heavily. I don't know who decided, but they made Bieber more ripped, and they made his bulge bigger. They gave him a bigger dick.
You went from a 4 to like a 7.5 now.
I was at a 4? Come on, man.
Getting makeup professionally done only confirms my greatest fear, that I have a big fat face. So I'm recreating the Magic Mike XXL poster, Channing Tatum, front and center, a triple threat. Really good looking, can model, can act, can dance. Films like Magic Mike series. It is part of this enjoyment of the perfect male physique. Every guy wants abs, but they're just so hard to get. First, you have to eat a certain way, then you can't drink.
Do you drink beer?
I drink everything. I'm of the opinion that these things are attainable if you have the time and the money and the team to constantly work out and get that 8-pack abs. It's just no one's that rich or has that much time except for celebrities and actors and models. It's not our job to look that good.
Let's take some photos. Masculine, 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 masculine.
I want you to walk into it. So first one, so try to make it look a little more natural.
I don't think I've ever looked at myself and been like, fuck yeah, boy, you hot as fuck. I feel like I'm not masculine enough. Although I was told that I look good in a tank top, which is great because I'm terrified of wearing a tank top, because a tank top shows your arms off. And if you don't have any arms to show off, then you're just like, hey, look at me, I'm out of shape. Look at the gangly noodle man.
Less sad. You look really sad. Now you look scared.
We're gonna have to maybe define the muscles a little bit more. Make him look more rugged. Good, good. That looks great.
Yeah.
Yeah, Asian Channing Tatum. I just know that there's so much about me that is not up to par.
That was really close.
Ooh, this is tough.
Whether people think you look good or you don't, like, anyone can have problems with how they look.
Hopefully we have at least one that looks kind of like the Channing Tatum photo.
So when we send this to the retoucher, we're probably gonna have to stitch his body from different frames and put them together.
So he wasn't actually jumping?
He's also a natural thruster.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right now, we're comparing ourselves to this image of someone who's like beautifully sculpted. That's, in the end, not the most healthy thing to do.
Just like be Cristiano.
Hey, I look pretty good. Amazing what makeup and lighting can do for you. This is the way his body looks, not because he's an underwear model, but because he is a professional sports player.
Kind of looks like he's like looking at something in the distance,
Yeah.
like sexily.
Like he's better than it,
Like
but
he's
he also
better than
wants
it?
it. It's hard to do all this, but also have a neutral face. I might feel dismayed that I am not that, but seeing the fantasy of that might be really exciting. I need positive reinforcement.
You look great.
Okay.
That would be pretty impossible for anyone, actually, to be as perfect as Cristiano. Props to Ned.
I'll put the photo next to the place where I'm doing push-ups.
You look good, kid.
That's before Photoshop.
I feel like I'm definitely killing it and have no self-doubts about this moment. I'll tell you, growing up, I never felt hot. I felt like a nerd. I look huggable. I feel like Bieber's supposed to look fuckable, not huggable.
So try to look more fuckable.
Okay, any tip?
3.
Sorry.
Why are you laughing?
It's harder than I thought it would be. Hopefully, I think that it's alien and weird, and I'm like, nah, fuck that. My body's beautiful. I should love me. But I might prefer it. I might prefer it. How much work do you think the Photoshop artist is gonna have to do to make me look like that?
If Bieber's wasn't enough, they're definitely gonna have to do something to yours. His bulge probably has to be a little bigger.
Have the Photoshop results, so we're gonna check them out.
I have this fear of seeing the final photo and being crushed and knowing that I can never achieve that ideal. I think I look awful. I hate this photo. I look like a surprised baby. I think a lot of guys use humor as a coping mechanism. If I don't laugh at this photo, then the only other option is to feel bad about it. You haven't seen it? Okay, oh my God. I look like an action figure. Everything that I'm insecure about has been erased in this photo. Looking at this photo now, I feel like I should look like this. Like, should I not be okay with my body? Should I be striving for this? When I think of my attractiveness, I think about my personality. But as guys, you don't often think of your body as sexual.
I think a lot of men out there, especially straight men, don't necessarily confront that as openly as LGBT men. But for me, having to always constantly deal with my relationship with my body and navigate that, this will be really, really eye-opening. I was just struck with a really great epiphany. I've always wanted to look like this, but seeing this now in front of me makes me realize I'll always have a problem with my body because I just thought that my stomach still looks fat. It really shows how me being so hypercritical of myself won't translate into being more self-confident. If you have a problem with how you look, that's a way deeper issue than just changing your outsides.
I'm excited to see it. I want to see how I look, you know, all swole and sexy like Mr. Krasinski. But I'm also afraid that maybe it will make me feel worse about myself. Let's see what a perfect Keith would look like. Wow. Oh man, look at those arms. Those arms are huge. Man, I look strong as fuck. This is terrifying. I don't like that at all. No one wants to be friends with this guy. This guy looks like a jerk. This is Brad. They put muscles on my shadow. My shadow could beat me up. And while I lament that my body's not better, I don't know if I really want to look like that. Maybe I like my soft body more than I thought.
Having good muscles means that you're also healthy and strong. That is what I want to be as a man. Healthy so that I can provide for my family, so that I can carry children upstairs. Oh, damn!
I look like a god among men.
There's muscles there that I do not have. Cristiano Ronaldo is so rare. He's like 0.01% of the population that looks like that. If I wanted to look like this and have my job and like spend time with family, there's not enough hours in the day. You're just seeking to attain something that you can never get. Earlier I said that the stronger you are, the more healthy you are. There's a lot of other aspects to health that strength doesn't encompass. If I did all of the things I would need to do to have this sort of body, I don't think I would be healthy.
I will always have issues with how I look, but maybe I can lessen those issues by focusing on things that really matter. People aren't gonna just remember you because you have six-pack abs. They're gonna remember you because you're a good person.
I'm happy with my life. Why is one photo making me think that I'm not happy with my life? I'm totally fine with who I am. Improve yourself because you want to and because you enjoy it, not because you're trying to achieve an ideal that someone has told you you should fit.
Lots of people out there think that like, oh, if you're a guy, you should work hard and be strong. If you're unhappy with your body, you change it. It's like, if you're unhappy with your body, maybe you should just learn to love yourself for more than just your body.
All right, so I like using that video just because I think it's an interesting perspective when we're talking about how women are portrayed in the media. It's often interesting to see how the juxtaposition of how men are treated in the media, right? As women are shrunk down and pulled down to a smaller size, men are beefed up, right? And this is a problem that affects both men and women in conceptualizing their own identity in relation to what they're seeing in these constant ads and constant representations within the media. All right, so when it comes to gender and language, language reflects the values of the dominant culture. So this is one way that stereotypes are communicated and reproduced, but language can also produce changes in society. So language can be used to either break stereotypes or reaffirm them, right? So for example, in your book, they talked about how the term Miss was created instead of, M-I or M-S period, instead of either M-I-S-S or M-R-S, because the way that people would treat a woman, right, was in relation to her marital status, right? So kind of saying, if you said, oh, excuse me, Miss, or excuse me, Mrs. So-and-so, right? Basically, you're making a language representation where you're basically saying that the most important feature of a woman's identity is her marital status. So the fact that most women take their husband's name is another example, which reflects the old idea that women are property of their husbands. Although women don't think of that today, right? Women aren't necessarily today changing their name because they're like, oh, now I'm the property of my husband, right? That's not why they're doing it, right? But it just shows that it's kind of had an impact on the cultural understandings of what one does when one gets married, right? So, the idea of changing one's name still says that a woman's identity is not as important as a man's, right? We don't, women, it's normalized for us to grow up and wonder what, if you're planning on being in a heterosexual monogamous relationship, what your last name will end up being, right? Instead of men don't really have that. So, that's another thing too I like to talk about when we're in class, but we're not, I'm recording this, is, there's very few people that know people that a man has changed their name to their wife's last name, right? Like I have a couple people that I know that they either hyphenated or, that kind of thing, but it's pretty rare for a guy to take his wife's last name. But that's one of those things. It's super normative for a woman to do it, but why then, if a man does something like that, is it considered so wrong? It almost makes visible this idea that, women are the property of their husbands, because if a man wants to change his name, it's so unnormative, because why? Why would a man be property of his wife? Right? So anyway, obviously, another example would be when we're talking about gender and language is how everyone uses the word guys to refer to groups of men and women. Oh, I do this all the time, and I feel so bad about it. I use very gender language when it comes to that stuff. But it's because it's super unnormative to do it the other way around, right? So I wouldn't necessarily start class and be like, okay, ladies, settle down, right? Because, men are not used to being called ladies. Women are used to being called guys, dudes, those kind of things. Those words that are used as supposed to encompass everyone, but really they're not. They're words that are meant for men, and women are just the default to that, right? But for men, it was super unnormative for someone to call you a lady. If so, it's considered what? A challenge, a threat, a bad perception. So it's not something that men enjoy. Another example is that we tend to have nicknames for women that are based on babies or animals. So why does that matter? Because it infers that they need to be taken care of, or that they are helpless, right? Or not completely human. Like, you're kind of stretching them from their humanity by talking about them in an animalistic term, right? So some examples would be chicks, foxes, vixens. Vixen is a female fox. Bitches, babes, right? All of those kind of words are super normative in our culture, but they demean women by comparing them to animals, right? And really kind of going back to the idea of being babies or being things that need to be taken care of, right? So it just kind of shows how our language is not somehow separate of our cultural value system. If anything, it's the most strongly imbued with our values. And it's something that we often don't understand in our current time period, the history that's gone into the language itself. Like, for example, another terrible example. I think I talked about this in class. I don't remember. Is the rule of thumb, right? This phrase rule of thumb, which was basically kind of traces its lineage back to at a time when men could legally beat their wives if they could pull a switch that was no thinner than the width of their thumb, hence the rule of thumb. So, yeah, there's a lot of those weird, messed up phrases that remain from years of, gender segregation, years of racial and ethnic segregation, like all sorts of just terrible phrases that we reify because we don't know or we don't understand what the context is behind them. And oftentimes it just comes to us almost unconsciously because it's words that we use in order to communicate with each other. So we don't often evaluate and think about just how much those things are, a part of the culture themselves. So pop culture is just the beliefs, practices, and objects that are part of everyday traditions. So this includes popular music, film, magazines, TV, and of course social media, which is steadily increasing in its importance in our culture. So pop culture has been largely observed by researchers because of its strong influence on the social construction of gender. So when it comes to analyzing the media, a lot of people do, from a sociological perspective, a content analysis, which is a research method where you systematically analyze the actual content of documents, images, or other cultural artifacts, right? So, like this thing I've been wanting to do for years because it's terrible, but, this thing about Maury, the Maury Povich program. And if you've taken me previously, you've probably heard about this. But anyway, I don't want to throw it out there. I don't want you to steal my idea. No, I'm just kidding. No one else is going to do it. But a content analysis, you would have to set the parameters. So let's say I'm going to do Maury as my content analysis. Then I would have to set a parameter. How many years am I going to look at, right? What time period am I looking at? Am I going to analyze just the show itself or the commercials? Am I going to take it in the context of, what other programs are playing at that similar time frame? Like, the fact that when people are studying media and content analysis for daytime television, a lot of researchers focus on how historically daytime television was considered women's TV and primetime television was considered men's TV. And that's something that's been really changing lately. Anyway, they only find that out through doing these kind of content analysis where you really analyze these things for these deeper themes. Alrighty, so the body culture, this just is the idea that throughout the media, gendered bodies tell both men and women how we're supposed to look, how we're supposed to act, and of course meeting these ideals is difficult, if not impossible, because you need money, right? That's kind of the whole point of how it's advertised or how they make money on this, is that they give you an impossible thing that you can't achieve and then tell you, hey, buy all this crap and you can achieve it, right? So you have to buy cosmetics, you gotta have a personal trainer, a dietitian, all these kind of things. Such presentations construct social definitions of gender that link masculinity with power, size, strength, dominance, while women are literally cut down to size, as Kilborn calls it. So For women, being healthy means being small and thin. And for men, it means taking control or being powerful. So this has created a culture where men and women commonly scrutinize and survey their own bodies. And our bodies are really largely read as who we are. So in a culture where youth is praised, aging bodies are reviled, especially the aging bodies of women. Studies find that older women are vastly underrepresented in the media, even compared to other nations. Older women tend to play incidental or stereotypical roles in the media and advertising. So, for example, women in ads are often in ads for food or medical products, not for fun, travel, or electronics. Also, the prevalence of anti-aging ads suggests that older women are worthwhile only if they continue to look young. So men are also portrayed differently based on age, as older men are often used in ads for products like Viagra, which still portray older men as successful only if they are rich and if they can get an erection, right? Like that idea that, going back to gender and language, the idea that the word impotence is the word that we use when we describe a man not being able to get an erection is fascinating, because impotence really just means loss of power. Anyway, so, it's interesting how aging is portrayed in the culture because we're so afraid of it. It becomes this kind of, construction of fear and a motivation for advertising. But at the same time, how men and women are portrayed in it is very different. Women's sports. So one positive change in the media is the increased coverage of women's sports. Women grace sports magazines with feminist taglines like, "What if women ruled?" But in reality, the women who are featured are often the ones who are considered the most attractive. And the coverage of athletes, obviously has its own gendered assumptions as well, like emphasizing women's nurturing character. Oh, man. That's something I remember seeing during the Olympics, when they were focusing on the, previously gold and silver medal winning women's beach volleyball team. It's like the woman who had been like the focal point of all of their media coverage, they really did talk about much more about her as a wife and a mother, presented her in that context a lot during the like NBC coverage stuff, which I thought was really interesting, because she's also like one of the most, celebrated and medaled athletes in the world. And they didn't focus on that as much as, well, look at her, she's a good mom, right? Which is really bizarre, because I really never saw that with any of the male athletes. When they were doing their profiles, they might mention they have a kid, but it wasn't focused on like, wow, well, who cares if this guy's really good at this sport? He can really be a dad, right? So I don't know. Anyway, so I put a couple photos up here to kind of give some examples of how a lot of, strong women are used, athletic women are used. You have Anna Kournikova, the tennis player, right there on Maxim. You see what they did in ESPN's Body Issues for these female boxers. I mean, that makes a big difference, like, in kickboxer. So, they're not even, I mean, in the lower photo, they're almost starting to portray her having some power, but it's still so sexualized, right? They're not really celebrating them as powerful and strong, but they're really focusing on their femininity, meaning, well, look how tender and sweet, like the Ronda Rousey thing you have here, right? Where she's like backlit and she's nude and just like her hair is tousled, and it's like, she could kick your ass, but that's not how they're portraying her, right? Anyway, so, when going back to that Olympics example, studies of the coverage of Olympics show that men get 75% of the airtime devoted to their sports and competitions, and the research shows that commentators often attribute women's success to luck and men's to their physical abilities. Oh man, going back to the last Olympics, I watched a lot of that, and there was a lot of stuff on Twitter at the time about the kind of gendered coverage. Like there was that female swimmer that they talked the whole time about how it wouldn't have been possible without her male partner that was there to motivate her. Like there's just all of these weird attributions where this girl, set a new record, and they kept calling her the female Michael Phelps. Like things of that nature where, they kept, even these women that were doing very well, they were comparing them to men and only mentioning or putting them in the shadow of men. Which, yeah, not so great. So anyway, Twitter was kind of pissed about that. So, when it comes to this thing about who succeeds and fails in the Olympics, ability becomes a theme when women fail. But when men fail, coverage tends to focus on the competitor's success versus their failure. So, yeah, not great, fair representation. When it comes to gender children in the media, children's TV may be one of the most stereotypical sources of gendered images. Considering the numbers of hours that children watch TV, these images and shows become a very powerful socializing influence. By the time the average American kid is 15, they will have spent more time watching TV than attending school. So research shows the amount of media a child watches affects their notions of gender, as the more they watch, the more stereotypical views they're going to hold, because they're getting influenced by this so much. So the media and pop culture promote narrow definitions of who people are. As we talked about, aging is an issue as youth are, those that are constructed as beautiful, just as those who are white or light-skinned are seen as beautiful. These images and messages in the media reinforce gender stereotypes and limit possibilities people see in themselves for their own identities and expressions. So by calling them controlling images, that's just referring to the power of the media and pop culture to direct our concepts of ourselves and of others. So what we see in the media is not neutral. The media is a source of authority in society, producing what you might think of as cultural narratives, which are frameworks that people use to understand the world and themselves. So, for example, Latinos and African Americans tend to watch more television than whites, but they are rarely represented within the media. And if they are, they're portrayed in subordinate or stereotypical roles. So Black men are most often portrayed as athletes, criminals, or entertainers. Women of color are often stereotyped. Asian and Indigenous people are largely absent from TV completely, as are working class people when it comes to portrayals on TV. Gays and lesbians have recently gained more visibility in the media, but those portrayals tend to be very limited as well. So even though sometimes we're seeing more groups of people, if we only see a tokenized representation and people aren't seeing and meeting real people in their lives that challenge these things, and they're, putting media in the place of those social interactions, they come to see the world the way that the media portrays it. So there's been a long-standing debate about violence in the media. Many have tried to correlate the high levels of violence that we see in the media with high levels of violence in our culture, specifically violence against women. So research has long looked at this effect. Often research looks at the role of pornography in normalizing sexual violence against women. Even as mainstream porn sites have categories like rape, crying, choking, degradation, So I'm gonna put in this little video clip here that talks about how pornography has come to affect our understandings of desire. And I argue, especially because so many young adults are now using it as their first sexual experiences come through this frame of pornography, it means that just like any other media is gendered and not, just neutral, they're getting messages about power, dominance, control, patriarchy, that really kind of skew what should be normative and sexual, right? Like there's nothing wrong with sexuality. It's just that the way that mainstream, and otherwise, pornography has come to, portray women in general and portray sex in general is very transitory. Or like in the video, he talks about what he calls it, I think is the best example. He calls it sex with no hands. Just meaning that everything's about the camera shot and the penetration. It's not about authentic desire. And he talks about how, and I'll just let you watch the clip because I'll just tell you the whole thing. But anyway, just how, when he was young and he was interested in someone, he didn't authentically desire sex with no hands. He authentically desired like talking to that person, touching that person, kissing that person, right? And the more that we let this kind of specific messages and narratives of pornography into our sex roles, into our sex lives, it starts to shape and control our own understandings and identities when it comes to sex. So anyway, watch this video.
I stopped watching porn for two reasons, basically. The first one was that porn brought so much anger and violence into my private fantasies. And these were anger and violence that were not there originally to begin with. And I did not want that for me anymore. This was not me, and I decided to just put an end to it. Easier said than done. I'll get to it later, but the second reason was that I came to realizing, I think, that only by watching porn, I take part in creating a demand for filmed prostitution, because that's what porn really is, filmed prostitution. Porna stands for prostitute, graphia stands for documentation, and prostitution was nobody's childhood dream, okay? That it is always a result of trouble and distress. Now, I became aware of that gradually when I was volunteering with men and women in prostitution, some of them victims of human traffic, serving aid in brothels, under the bridge, in street corners, but you don't really need to do all that in order to understand how this mechanism of porn and prostitution works. Because porn as a genre, it's not about erotica or healthy sexual communication. It is all about male domination of women, subordinance of women, not only as a sexual practice, as a way of being, as a genderial hierarchy in this world. Like if we would ask porn, if we were to ask porn, how does it define something as sexual? What qualifies, what defines something as sexual? Porn would laugh in our face. What defines sexual? Whatever men find arousing. Men find it arousing to choke a woman, to have brutal sex without one touch, hug, kiss, tender caress. Well, then it is sexual. It arouses men to see a woman or a child cry. It is sexual. It arouses men to rape a woman. Well, then it is sexual. In every mainstream porn gallery on the web, we can find the rape category, side by side with the humiliation category, abuse category, crying category, and so on. And this is all as if regular porn is not already filled with these motives. Even in its mildest version, the mildest version of porn, what porn is showing us, like, I don't know, 80, maybe 90% of the time, is actually sex with no hands involved. And this is not how we authentically desire. Sorry, I'll repeat that. I see your look. Sex with no hands involved. Okay. If you're not going to give up watching porn, so next time you do watch, just notice that porn cameras have no interest in capturing any normal sensual activities, such as petting, caressing, making out, touching, hugging, kissing. No. What porn cameras are into is the penetration. So normally, the composition will be a man and a woman, hopefully just one, okay? So one man and one woman. His penis is inside her. Don't be picky, it doesn't matter where inside. Somewhere inside her there is a penis. His penis is somewhere inside her, okay? And in order to not block the camera for doing this extreme close-up on the penetration, he's standing with his hands behind his back most of the time. And the woman is in this uncomfortable position, and she needs to handle the penis inside her without damaging the hair or makeup work done on her, because that's money invested and time invested in her, without disturbing his aggressive movement, and mainly without blocking the camera. So the result is that we got two people having sex, different shapes and acrobatics or something, but they're having sex when the only body parts that actually touch each other are the penis and the part being penetrated. No hands involved. Now, I talk, I don't know, 250, 300 times a year. Soldiers, students, pupils. No one has ever come up to me and say, Ran, you know, that part with sex with no hand thing, that was my authentic desire. Like, when I was 11 or 12, I never wanted to kiss anybody or touch them. I was not curious about that. It was all penetrations to begin with. No one has ever said that. Before porn. After porn. In my private fantasies before watching porn, there was always a very strong narrative. And the narrative was of sensuality and mutuality, which means that I had always imagined what I will say to her. What would she possibly answer? What options do I have to respond? In real life, it never works like I planned, but it was super important in my mind in terms of arousal, the build-up, the location, the setting, where will it be? What are the circumstances of me and her being all alone all of a sudden? How will this bodily inflaming between us will emerge step by step. It was super important before porn. After making a habit out of porn, it conquers your mind and it invades your brain, and I lost my ability to imagine, which means I found myself, and I won't be too explicit, but trying to masturbate, just closing my eye, trying to fantasize desperately about something human and not making it because my head was bombarded with all those images of women being violated and subordinated and forced into pretending they enjoy diabolic sperm rituals, okay? So this is pretty much the result. And we are all vulnerable to pornography. It's not just young people. And we should be very careful, I think, with not only what we put into our bodies, but in terms of food and nutrition, in what is the nutrition of our mind? Because everything we watch invades us. I'll give you a short example from non-sexual areas. I came back home, and my beloved one was watching some cultural junk. She was watching a karaoke show, auditions, the one with the chairs spinning. And we don't have a TV set back home, okay? We don't have a TV set back home, but only because it allows us to falsely present ourselves as deep and profound people. Wait, I know, no, I never heard of that. Mastectomy, who? Angelina, no, we don't have a TV. We watch every cultural junk possible, okay? Not me, not her, we don't contemplate about l'existence. We download stuff, and we download all cultural junk. So I'm watching this 20 minutes karaoke show, and it was so boring and tedious, okay? 2 minutes talking, 4 minutes blabbering about it. I lost patience after like 20 minutes, and I went off to take a shower. And the most interesting part was in the shower, because what I found out there was myself in my most pathetic ever. I'm going to share it with you. I want to feel that you actually accept me and love me, so I have to share my most pathetic, and you have to accept it now. I don't know until I got over myself if it took me, 5, 7, 10 minutes to realize that I'm standing under the water in the shower, pondering severely what would have been my song for the auditions. Deep and profound, mind you. I won't be doing this Rihanna, Lady Gaga, I'll be doing Mercedes Sosa, Como un pájaro libre. I'll be doing a cover for Bob Dylan's Blind Willie McTell. Ain't that deep and profound? I had to realize that I'm an idiot because I have no talent for music. More than that, I never wanted to be neither a musician nor a singer-songwriter. This was never a part of my inner world of wishes. Okay, but I'm a human being. What can I do? I was watching that for 20 minutes. It entered my brain for a while. So if we take this example and we just try to measure or estimate the impact of 20 minutes of watching no matter what, how it invades our mind and conquer our wantings and desires, let's just try to imagine, or I can share with you orally, what is the impact of 20 minutes of watching porn once, twice a week, nothing unmoderated. It's overtaking. And porn is in our households whether we want it or not, and I believe that it does not agree with our well-being. And because we have internet in the Western world all over the place, almost in every cellular phone now, we've got 90% of 12-year-olds watching porn on a regular basis. And it has both an addictive effect and a paralyzing effect. It's addictive because we develop somewhat of a dependency in porn, but the paralyzing part is because, mainly for young boys and men, because porn is teaching us that as a man, you are solely valued in sex by having a large penis and an eternal erection. According to porn, being a valuable sexual partner does not relate with being sensual, passionate, attentive, generous, well-coordinated. None of the above. It is all about large penis and eternal sunshine, which we don't possess. So boys become paralyzed, and if they don't become paralyzed by watching porn, very often they turn into imitators of what they saw, which means they become aggressors. Aggressors, even when emotion is involved. Like, there is so much sexual abuse going on nowadays within the confines of what we perceive from the outside as beautiful teenage love stories or healthy adult relationships, because we don't really talk about sex. We just see it all over the place. We don't really talk about it. So what goes on in the confines of a certain room, but these are all sexual mutations that happens. If we talk about women, it's not only that, but young girls and women get the message, not only from hardcore porn, but from our porn-influenced mainstream culture. Have you seen any Miley Cyrus, Lady Gaga video clip commercials. That's porn with clothes on it. So girls get this notion that if you want to be worthy of love, first and foremost, you have to be worthy of sexual desire. And now, the definition of sexual desire almost equals be like a porn star. So I work in dozens and dozens of high schools and junior highs. In every single one of these schools, I find girls that at a certain point agreed to be documented in an intimate situation because they wanted to please some guy that they had feelings for. And this guy misappropriated their trust. Always same story, so he sells it on WhatsApp application or on the web, in the internet. And normally nobody even addresses him in terms of moral. But it is always girls that suffer from shaming and mortification. They can change school, they drop out normally, change school, move to another city and still be haunted on social networks. They develop clinical depressions, severe eating disorders, as if we don't have enough reasons in our culture to develop eating disorders. They become so isolated socially. So some of them, like Amanda Todd, rest in peace, some of them actually commit suicide because they find no more value in life or in themselves. So porn is not only in our house, it is a capital case. It is not a minor phenomenon in our society. It is a question of life and death sometimes. It is mainly a question of life and death for the people who participate in porn, because porn is not an embodiment of freedom of speech, freedom of occupation, blah, blah, blah. No, it's an embodiment of sex exploitation, working side by side with human traffic, raping, pimping, solicitation. For every one porn star with a book contract or a production company, we've got hundreds of thousands of women and girls who does not survive out there. Literally, they just don't make it. The sex industry just, how do you say, chews them up and spits them back into brothels, into hooking in the street, escorting, massage parlors with happy or unhappy ending, depends who you ask. And I'm not joking, this is serious life. This is the whole spectrum of prostitution. So many of them doesn't even make it to the age of 50. I'm talking countries that the average life expectancy is 75, 76 years now. They don't make it to the age of 50, for reasons mainly. Drugs, STDs, sexually transmitted diseases, being murdered by a John, a pimp, a boyfriend. And the fourth reason is suicide once again. Because if you're a prostitute, on camera or off camera, you're in the situation that we can refer to as social death. We have all sat in the dinner table with people who probably consumed prostitution, that have been to a brothel once, twice, at least. We never sat down to the table with a prostitute, not with a declared one. So that's social death. It is not glamorous, not at all. And when I sit in the privacy of my room and I watch porn, even without paying, no need to pay, it's free, okay? I hope you know that, if you're still consuming. Whatever I am watching is creating a demand, and wherever there is a demand, there will be supply. There's a correlation. If I watch pornography of black older women, somebody is gonna go out and pimp black older women. Asian minors, somebody is already trafficking Asian minors in order to film them, okay? Israeli women, Palestinian women, WASP, all-American college girls, that are strong in the last few years, it's a very upcoming category. The scum of the earth are already out there trying to solicitate and prostitute these women on camera. So I stopped watching porn for my personal well-being, my intimate communication, my private erotic life, my, reclaiming control and responsibility over my mind. But by doing that, I actually stopped contributing to this horrible sex industry, and that's a good thing to do, I believe. And I would really like to propose that notion of physically and emotionally safe sex. Emotionally safe sex. It does not mean going back to be conservative or unliberated sexually. I'm all for sexual freedom. It just means that we need to put genderial hierarchy aside, subordinates aside, and bring back in, let's just say, laughter as a critical mass for intimacy. Two souls, two humans, two souls alone in private. Can they please have a laugh together? I don't care if they know each other for a decade or for an hour. If two souls alone in a room does not manage to have a laugh together, what good could possibly grow there, sexual and non-sexual? That's emotionally safe sex. I've got so many things I really want to share with you, but I feel like my time is almost up. So I just really want to ask for us to speak about these issues more, because I strongly feel that our history of silence never did us any good, because silence only perpetuates more silence, while talking normally gives birth to more talking, more sharing, more identification, more awareness, more change. Small change in our small, humble life, but real change, a true one, emotionally safer. Thank you for listening.
So obviously, women's bodies are sexually objectified in the media. Research finds that women's views on their own bodies are negatively affected by that sexual objectification. So when it comes to breasts, they are super sexualized and it's used to sell everything, right? So research in your book exposed men to various media sources and found that those who partook in those mediums were more likely to see women as sexual objects, to see pregnancy and childbirth as gross, and less likely to support women being able to breastfeed in public, right? Which always just reminds me of Angie Andrus at Fullerton College. She's like, they're not boobs, they're not tits, they're not whatever, they are. She would always say it over and over so that you would memorize it like a mantra. Milk-producing, life-sustaining breasts. So I think kind of an example of this right now that's kind of ongoing would be the hashtag free the nipple and all these kind of breastfeeding campaigns as well, where it's okay to have breasts bared out if they're for men's sexual consumption. But if like someone's trying to like feed a baby that's hungry, it's like, hey, newsflash, guess what breasts are actually for? They're not just for patriarchal male consumption. They're actually for literal baby consumption, right? So that they can eat stuff. So, it's the fact that, again, this is culturally specific. In tropical areas, this isn't really as much of a thing, right? A lot of people don't, or at least in indigenous cultures, did not wear clothing or tops because it's just freaking hot, right? So no one wants to do that. So in those cultures, breasts aren't sexualized. They're pretty normalized. It's normal for women not to wear a shirt or men not to wear a shirt. But in cultures like our own, men are allowed to bare their chest, but women aren't. Because why? Because their breasts are sexualized. It's considered a sexual thing. But yeah, if a woman takes out a boob and tries to feed a kid, it's like, ew, gross, put that thing away, right? So it's interesting how that's kind of going on in the culture right now as well. So, the media is a form of social interaction in our culture, and that's one that's becoming more and more relevant as people become more disconnected socially and more connected electronically. So a couple different theories to kind of understand how this is working. So role learning theory suggests that images in the media become the models for how people construct their self-concepts and cultural ideas. So if the images present a narrow idea of beauty, as ours obviously does, that will affect men and women's understandings of beauty, right? That's what role learning theory would argue. Organizational theories of gender inequality argue that the gendered content we see in the media results from the gender inequality within media organizations. So, if you look at the organizations themselves, obviously very few women and people of color are in leadership or board positions within these media conglomerates, which means they're not really getting to greenlight or, make the decisions that would actually make sure that representations are more fair and, actually representative and not just, really skewed to one narrow perspective. Capitalism in the media is a big one. Obviously, major corporations own the media. And these huge conglomerates mean that the majority of news, entertainment, and media you see are controlled by a handful of powerful corporations. Literally, handful. Within a capitalist system, it is the interest of the sponsors to foster images that are consistent with the products they want to sell. So ad imagery affects overall media imagery, right? So random example of that would be the fact that media fairness doctrine was struck down in the 80s by Reagan. And so what happened as a result, there was these two reporters that tried to, they worked for Fox, which it's not Fox News, it's Fox TV. They worked for Fox, and they basically, they were trying to do a story on Monsanto, which long story on that, backstory, I could give you all day on that. But anyway, if you're interested, come talk to me about Monsanto. But anyway, so basically they were looking at the growth hormones that they were developing, this is way before the GMO situation, growth hormones they were developing for cows, like RGBST. I can't remember what the freaking things are called. But anyway, basically, what would happen is they wanted milk supply to increase. So they gave, steroids, hormones, whatever, to cows to increase the size of their udders so that they produce more milk. But as a result, a lot of them got infections and got sick, so they had to give them antibiotics to make them not sick, right? Which is also why the FDA allows a certain percentage of pus in your milk. Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't drink milk, so it doesn't bother me at all. But anyway, so basically, yeah, they realized that this growth hormone was causing a lot of problems in the fact that not only was it making them sick, but since they needed to use antibiotics to counter that, that meant that people were drinking antibiotics. And what they started to see as a result is people being very resistant to staph infections, right? Staph infection is something that you could, easily deal with before with antibiotics. Now people are becoming more resistant because they're taking in more antibiotics over time by drinking milk. So basically, these two reporters from Fox had this story. They wanted to report on it. And, they wrote up this whole thing and they did their whole thing. And then Fox told them no. And they were like, well, why not? And they said, well, because Monsanto is an advertiser for us, right? And so they were like, well, that's BS. Like, it shouldn't matter. We're news. And news means you actually just truth to power. Like, the whole point is to, expose stuff and whatever. And so, long story short, court case done and gone. Basically, what happened was the two reporters lost. Fox News won. And what was set as a precedent was that you don't have to tell the truth in news media. It just set a precedent that you are still beholden to your corporate sponsors, right? More so than the public safety of human beings. So that's not great. So obviously capitalism, the fact that in order for our media system to run and survive, what makes your Netflix so awesome? It's not having commercials, right? It's being able to binge and not have commercials. Well, guess why you don't have commercials? Because you're paying for it, because it's a subscription-based service. I guarantee you in the next 20 years, we won't have any subscription-based services that don't have advertisements. That's just how that goes. It's like the worst. Cable didn't used to have advertisements. Do you know that? Cable. When cable came out, didn't have ads. That was what was so alluring. You're paying for it. You're paying for cable. So anyway, it's coming. It's coming for all of us. But anyway, for now, I'll enjoy it and just binge the crap out of Netflix. But, that's why we enjoy it. But the idea is with capitalism, in a capitalistic system, unless we're going to publicly subsidize media systems, which kind of we do through the public airwaves, then it's not going to pay for itself. So the fact that we've wedded advertising so closely to media means that it relies upon corporations. So who's going to say a bad thing about a corporation if they're afraid they're going to lose them as a sponsor? That is inherently a conflict of interest for consumers, right? Anyway, I'll keep talking about that if you let me. Social construction theory. All right, so the media constructs a version of reality for us, setting the standard of beauty, for example. And as we talked about, gender roles are largely socially constructed as a socializer. Media can challenge these ideals, but often it reifies them instead, right? So there's often times or people or roles or portrayals in the media that challenge the stereotype, and they're the best, right? They're those media things that we love, right? And Buffy, right? Buffy the Vampire Slayer was one of those ones I loved that show when I was young. And I remember Joss Whedon was being interviewed about it, and they asked him about why do you feel the need to write, a strong female character? And I think his comment was something like, well, I mean, obviously that needs to happen until people stop asking that question, because at the time it was pretty rare to see that kind of nuanced, realistic, yet, kind of strong portrayal of a woman. So, the media can itself provide alternate versions, can provide alternate identities that we can actually kind of expand our scope. So the media isn't inherently bad. It's just necessarily how it's being framed, who is, basically steering it and leading it is what makes that difference. And so postmodernism believes that truth and knowledge are subjective. There's no such thing as objectivity. meaning none of us are objective. So most postmodernists want to deconstruct what we know and rebuild our social institutions with the new social logics, meaning not just kind of based on the modernity aspects. So they think that distinctions between groups of women should be seen in what they have in common instead of dividing women. So instead of dividing women by age, ethnicity, religion, ideology, we should be seeing like about how those different groups have experiences that are interacting, overlapping, right? So they think that deconstructing language and social institutions will bring about improved status for women, right? So often through changing the language, you change your perspective. I think we talked about this a bit in class, how I was like one of the first generations that feminists experimented on, right? Where they changed some of the names, like instead of fireman, it's firefighter. Instead of policeman, it's, you know, police officer, or, you know, those kind of things. Changing it slightly subtly so that there's actually a possibility a woman could do it, right? Those kind of things, when you deconstruct the language and see, oh, the language is assuming male in these leadership or protecting roles. So if you take that out and change it to something else, you can deconstruct that assumption, and then you can open up the possibility for a new gendered understanding of it. Though in reality, we still think of most cops as men. But anyway. All right, sociology of knowledge. So that's the study of the relationship between human thought and the social context from which it arises. So looking at ideology and the effects of those norms and prevailing ideas have on societies, that's what they're looking at. So Mannheim was the one who came up with the idea of sociology of knowledge. And Mannheim credited Marx for looking at ideology as he tried to understand human civilization as a series of class conflicts that occur in a cyclical loop, meaning that there's groups of power struggling for resources. And Marx argued that those with financial power would use the power that they have to make their ideas the dominant ideas in society. In some ways, you could argue Marx is right when looking at corporate conglomerate stranglehold on our current media system, where all the forms of media we encounter in our daily lives are controlled by a very small handful of companies, right? And not just media, meaning television, right? Those same companies own all of our picture studios, all of our magazines and newspapers and radio airwaves as well. It's fascinating. It's very small control. So, you know, these powers then can transmit their version of reality via the airwaves, which is largely what got us into this crazy political season this last year and the kind of mess that we're in right now. It's very fascinating seeing what, quote, the media, as he refers to them as, are reacting to this like crisis of normalcy, basically, that's been going on. Anyway, fun stuff. We'll talk about that later. All right, so Mannheim argues that, you know, again, using Marx's ideas as a framework, but he doesn't see the powerful in a cabal, strategically planning, right? Like in that kind of like, wahahaha, excellent kind of thing. You know, he thinks that the ideologies do not always have a specific intent and don't come strictly from class ideologies of control. So he was interested in how social groups produce distorted thinking. And through that generational ideologies of distorted thinking. So he thought that the sociology of knowledge could only emerge during a historical period characterized by social instability and a lack of agreement over worldviews. So increasing social mobility was one factor that resulted in the lack of unity over worldviews. Mannheim distinguished between two types of social mobility, horizontal and vertical. Another factor that encouraged the creation of sociology of knowledge was the emergence of a socially unattached intelligentsia, right? You don't get to say that a lot. The free intelligentsia first created epistemology and psychology as methods of investigation to understand the social world, but both approaches failed to integrate the individual mind with the larger community, hence sociology. Or, of course, Mannheim called it sociology of knowledge, right, to correct that failure. So, you know, let's clean up after psych what they missed. No, I'm just kidding. That's what Mannheim is saying. So ideology, according to Mannheim, an ideology is a set of ideas that, quote, conceals the present by attempting to comprehend it in terms of the past. Right? That's a cool definition. So sexism in his type of ideology that stands to justify inequality in the past and present. So we're constantly told these logics uphold this ideology. When we present women's bodies separate of their humanity in advertisements, when we essentialize men as breadwinners who need a six-pack and a constant erection, we also see women in this dichotomy of you're a sexual object, you're a mother. And when it comes to portrayals in TV and film, representation is rife with sexism. So this is an issue in a world that is increasingly independent, while simultaneously more dependent on media to understand what the world is. Like I said, looking at the context of how a lot of social organizations that were normative previous generations have broken down, and now the media is trying to fill in that gap to kind of be our constant world, especially with our devices, our computers, our tablets, our phones, our smartwatches, our everything. We're constantly surrounded by these things, and we're almost addicted to this situation where we constantly have to be plugged in and tuned in. But if anything, we feel like we're in a flood of just pointless information, right? So, it's interesting how the current day is kind of dealing with these changes in the larger culture, how it's shifting into the media. So something still remains to be seen how that's going to play out.